Commander Jake Morrison stood at the big window of his ship and looked out at the colorful gas clouds floating in space. His ship was called the UES Liberty, and it was one of the best ships that humans had built. But compared to the other ships, flying around the galaxy, it looked like an old truck next to a fancy sports car. 3 years had passed since humans first met aliens, and those 3 years had not been kind to human pride. The aliens had put humans in a group called Tier 7 Primitive species, which was a nice way of saying that humans were barely smart enough to tie their own shoes. Jake remembered the day when the first alien ship landed on Earth. Everyone thought it would be like the movies where humans would either fight the aliens or become friends with them. Instead, the aliens looked at human technology and weapons, and basically patted humans on the head, like they were cute children playing with toys. Dr. Lisa Hayes worked at the science station on Jake's ship, and she spent most of her time studying alien weapons and ships. The aliens used something called energy weapons that shot beams of light and particles that could cut through almost anything. Their ships had shields made of energy that could stop most attacks. Lisa had tried to understand how these weapons worked, but the aliens treated human scientists like students in kindergarten and would not share their real secrets. The Zephyrians were one of the alien races that looked down on humans the most. They lived in beautiful crystal cities that floated in the atmospheres of gas giant planets. Their ships looked like works of art, made of glass and metal that seemed to dance through space. When Zephyrian captains saw human ships, they would make comments about how crude and ugly human technology was. They said human ships looked like flying garbage cans held together with tape and hope. The Vorthak Collective was even worse. They were a group mind of aliens who all thought together as one big brain. They had ships that could appear and disappear, using technology that bent space and time. Their weapons could punch holes through planets if they wanted to. When human diplomats tried to trade with the Vorthak, they were told that human plasma weapons were charmingly antiquated, which was their way of saying that human weapons belonged in a museum. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Murphy was in charge of the soldiers on Jake's ship, and he had gotten tired of alien jokes about human weapons. The aliens thought that kinetic weapons, which meant weapons that threw physical objects, were primitive and stupid. They could not understand why humans still used rifles that shot bullets when they could use energy weapons that shot beams of light. Ryan would clean his rifle every day and tell his soldiers that the aliens were making a big mistake by ignoring the power of kinetic energy. Captain Helen Torres had the worst job of all the humans in space. She had to work with the alien military commanders and pretend that everything was fine when they treated her like a child. The aliens would give humans the worst assignments, like patrolling empty areas of space where nothing ever happened. They would give humans old star maps that were missing important information about dangerous areas. When big military operations happened, the aliens would tell humans to stay home and let the real soldiers handle things. Helen had to smile and act grateful when alien commanders would explain basic military tactics to her as if she had never been in a fight before. She had been a soldier for 20 years and had commanded troops in 3 different wars on Earth, but the aliens treated her like a new recruit who needed to be taught which end of a weapon was dangerous. The worst part was that she had to send reports back to Earth telling the human government that the aliens still thought humans were too stupid and weak to be trusted with real responsibilities. The Federation Council was where all the important decisions were made, and humans were allowed to attend meetings, but they were not allowed to vote on anything important. Human representatives had to sit in a special section marked for primitive species, and they could only speak when the advanced aliens gave them permission. When humans tried to suggest ideas or offer help, the aliens would listen politely and then ignore everything humans said. Jake had heard stories from other human ship captains about how aliens would change the subject whenever humans tried to talk about military tactics or weapon technology. The aliens acted like humans were children who had wandered into an adult conversation about things too complicated for human brains to understand. Some aliens were polite about it and some were rude, but they all agreed that humans were not ready to be treated as equals. The galaxy had been at peace for a long time because all the advanced alien races had similar technology and similar ways of fighting. When 2 alien fleets fought each other, it was like a chess match where both players knew all the same moves. Energy shields stopped energy weapons, so battles became contests to see who had stronger power sources and better shield generators. The aliens had figured out all the rules of space combat, and they followed those rules like a religious ceremony. Dr. Hayes often talked to Jake about how the aliens seemed stuck in their ways of thinking. They had decided that energy weapons were the best weapons and that energy shields were the best defense, and they could not imagine that there might be other ways to fight. When humans showed aliens their kinetic weapons, the aliens would laugh and make jokes about throwing rocks at spaceships. They thought that any civilization advanced enough to travel between stars would obviously know that energy weapons were superior to physical projectiles. What the aliens did not know was that humans had never stopped working on kinetic weapons. While the aliens were focused on making better energy beams and stronger energy shields, humans were quietly working on ways to throw objects faster and harder than anyone thought possible. The aliens assumed that because humans used primitive, kinetic weapons, it meant that humans were primitive. They never considered that humans might make those primitive weapons into something that could change everything. Jake looked out at the stars and wondered what would happen if the aliens ever realized that they had made a terrible mistake about humans. But for now, humans had to be patient and let the aliens think they were harmless and stupid. That patience was about to pay off in ways that would shock the entire galaxy. Far away from the alien fleets and their fancy energy weapons, Dr. Alex Chen was working on something that would change everything. His laboratory was built inside a space station that orbited around Europa, which was one of the moons of Jupiter. The station looked ordinary from the outside, like any other human research facility, but inside it held the most dangerous secret that humans had ever created. Alex had been working on railgun technology for 15 years. A railgun was a weapon that used magnetic fields to throw metal objects at extremely high speeds. The idea was simple, but making it work properly was incredibly difficult. Early human railguns could barely shoot a small piece of metal fast enough to dent a car door. Alex had built something that could shoot a telephone pole-sized piece of tungsten at 12% of the speed of light. The key breakthrough had come from studying materials that humans had found while mining asteroids in the outer solar system. These materials could conduct electricity better than anything humans had used before, and they could create magnetic fields powerful enough to bend space itself. When Alex first calculated how fast his railgun could shoot, he thought he had made a mistake in his math. No weapon had ever been built that could accelerate an object to such incredible speeds. Engineer Kate Williams worked with Alex to design the targeting system for the railgun. The weapon was so powerful that it could shoot across entire star systems, but hitting a target at such distances required computers that could calculate the movement of planets and stars. Kate had designed a system that could predict where a target would be several hours in the future and aim the railgun to hit that exact spot. The targeting computer could track thousands of objects at once and choose the perfect moment to fire. The railgun itself was nearly 2 kilometers long, and it looked like a giant metal tube covered in copper coils. The magnetic coils were arranged in a spiral pattern that would grab the tungsten projectile and accelerate it faster and faster as it traveled down the barrel. The power required to fire the weapon was enormous. The railgun needed more electricity than most planets used in an entire year, and it had to use all that power in less than a second. Colonel Dan Foster had been sent from Earth to make sure that the railgun project stayed secret. Dan had worked in military intelligence for most of his career, and he knew how to keep secrets from enemies and allies alike. He had created a cover story that made the Europa station look like a research facility studying ice formations on Jupiter's moons. Even the workers at the station did not know what they were really building until the final weeks of construction. Dr. Patricia Moore was the physicist who had figured out how to make the railgun work. She had been laughed at by alien scientists when she presented her ideas at a Federation science conference. The aliens had told her that kinetic weapons were caveman technology and that any advanced civilization would know better than to waste time on such primitive ideas. Patricia had smiled politely while the aliens made fun of her work, but inside she was already planning how to prove them wrong. The tungsten projectile that the railgun would fire was surprisingly simple. It was just a long metal rod that had been shaped to fly straight and hit hard. There were no explosives or complicated electronics inside it. The projectile would destroy its target through pure kinetic energy, which meant the force of its mass moving at incredible speed. Patricia had calculated that the tungsten rod would hit with more force than a nuclear bomb, but it would create no radiation or fallout. The test firing was scheduled for a date that had been chosen very carefully. Human intelligence had been monitoring alien fleet movements, and they knew that most of the major alien ships would be far away from the test site. The target was an asteroid in an empty solar system where no one lived and no ships traveled. If everything went according to plan, the test would happen, and no aliens would even notice. Kate had run thousands of computer simulations of the test firing, and every simulation showed the same result. The tungsten projectile would completely destroy the target asteroid and create a cloud of superheated debris that would expand outward at high speed. The energy release would be visible across several star systems, but it would look like a natural event rather than a weapon test. Alex spent his days making final adjustments to the magnetic coils and checking the power systems. The railgun had only one chance to work perfectly because after it fired once, the weapon would need weeks of maintenance before it could fire again. Every component had been tested and retested, but Alex still worried that something might go wrong at the last moment. The workers at the Europa station had no idea that they were about to make history. Most of them thought they were building a new type of mining laser that would be used to extract materials from asteroids. The security clearance required to know the truth about the railgun was so high that only a dozen people in the entire human government knew what was really happening at Europa. President Martinez had been briefed about the railgun project, and he had given his approval for the test firing. The president understood that if the test worked, it would change humanity's position in the galaxy forever. If the test failed, it would set back human military development by decades and give the aliens even more reason to treat humans like children. Patricia checked and rechecked her calculations about the targeting solution. The asteroid they had chosen as a target was roughly the same size and composition as an alien battleship. If the railgun could destroy the asteroid, it would be able to destroy any ship in the galaxy. The aliens had never built shields designed to stop kinetic weapons because they thought kinetic weapons were too primitive to be a threat. Dan Foster had prepared detailed security protocols for the test firing. Every human ship in the area would be given cover stories about why they needed to be in position to observe the test. The alien monitoring stations would be fed false information about solar flare activity that would explain any unusual energy readings they detected. The countdown to the test had begun, and everyone involved in the project felt the weight of history on their shoulders. In just a few days, humans would either prove that they belonged among the advanced civilizations of the galaxy, or they would confirm that they were still the primitive species that everyone thought they were. Alex looked at his railgun and knew that everything depended on whether his calculations were correct and his engineering was sound. The galaxy was about to learn that humans had spent 3 years of being ignored and underestimated very wisely. While the aliens had been congratulating themselves on their advanced technology, humans had been perfecting the art of throwing rocks really, really fast. The morning of the test began like any other day in the galaxy. Alien ships moved along their regular patrol routes, and alien diplomats attended boring meetings about trade agreements and territorial boundaries. The Hegemony Council was arguing about new taxes on imported goods from the Outer Rim territories. The Vorthak Collective was planning their next expansion into systems that had valuable mining resources. The Zephyrian crystal fleets were conducting routine maintenance on their floating cities. None of the aliens had any idea that this ordinary day would become the most important day in galactic history. Commander Jake Morrison received a coded message on his personal communicator while he was eating breakfast in his quarters aboard the UES Liberty. The message looked like a routine maintenance report, but Jake knew the real meaning of the code words. Operation Thunderbolt had been approved, and the test would happen in exactly 6 hours. Jake quietly changed his ship's course toward the coordinates, where human observers were supposed to gather. Dr. Lisa Hayes was monitoring subspace communication channels from her station on the bridge. She listened to the normal chatter between alien ships and space stations. Cargo vessels were requesting permission to dock at various ports. Military patrols were checking in with their command centers. Diplomatic couriers were carrying messages between different alien governments. Everything sounded completely normal and peaceful. At the Europa Research Station, Dr. Alex Chen was making his final preparations for the railgun test. The weapon had been charging its power systems for 3 days, and the magnetic coils were humming with barely contained energy. The tungsten projectile sat in the firing chamber looking deceptively simple for something that was about to change: the balance of power in the galaxy. Engineer Kate Williams ran through her targeting calculations one more time. The asteroid they had chosen as their target was tumbling slowly through empty space in a solar system that no one had visited for hundreds of years. The asteroid was made of rock and metal, and it was roughly the same size as a Vorthak battlecruiser. If the Railgun could destroy this asteroid, it could destroy any ship that any alien race had ever built. Colonel Dan Foster checked the security protocols that would keep the test secret from alien observers. Human ships throughout the local sector had been given orders that would put them in position to monitor the test without making it obvious that something important was happening. The cover story was that humans were investigating reports of a distress signal that had turned out to be a false alarm. Dr. Patricia Moore stood at the control panel that would fire the railgun and tried to calm her nerves. She had spent years working on the mathematics and engineering that made this weapon possible. Alien scientists had laughed at her ideas and called her work primitive and useless. In a few minutes, she would prove that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. The countdown reached its final minutes, and Alex began the firing sequence. Power flowed through the magnetic coils, and the railgun's barrel began to glow with heat from the enormous electrical currents running through it. The targeting computer locked onto the asteroid and calculated the exact moment when the projectile would need to be fired to hit the target. Captain Helen Torres was aboard a Federation command ship observing routine fleet exercises when she received a coded signal telling her to monitor long-range sensors for unusual energy readings. Helen had been working with alien military commanders for 3 years, and she was tired of being treated like a junior officer who needed constant supervision. She was about to see those same commanders learn that they had seriously underestimated human capabilities. The aliens continued their normal activities, completely unaware that human technology was about to demonstrate something that would terrify every military leader in the galaxy. The Klaxon insect warriors were conducting training exercises with their bioships. The reptilian saurians were testing new armor plating on their heavy cruisers. The gaseous ethereals were practicing formation, flying with their energy-based vessels. Alex placed his hand on the firing control and looked at the readouts, showing that all systems were operating perfectly. The railgun had enough power to accelerate the tungsten projectile to 12% of light speed in the few milliseconds it would take to travel through the weapon's barrel. The projectile would then coast through space for several minutes before hitting its target. Kate confirmed that the targeting solution was locked and ready. The computer had calculated the asteroid's position, rotation, and orbital velocity with incredible precision. The tungsten rod would hit the asteroid at exactly the right angle to transfer maximum kinetic energy to the target. There would be no explosion in the traditional sense because the projectile contained no explosives. Instead, the sheer force of impact would vaporize both the projectile and the target. Patricia took a deep breath and realized that she was about to make history. Human weapons technology was about to leap ahead of every alien civilization in a single moment. The aliens had spent centuries perfecting energy weapons and energy shields, but they had never considered that someone might perfect kinetic weapons to such an extreme degree. Dan monitored the communication channels to make sure that no alien ships had wandered into the test area. The last thing humans needed was for an alien vessel to accidentally witness the test and report it to their governments. The secret had to be kept until humans were ready to reveal their new capabilities to the galaxy. Alex gave the final countdown, 10 seconds until firing. The magnetic coils reached full power, and the railgun's targeting system made microscopic adjustments to ensure perfect accuracy. 5 seconds until firing. The tungsten projectile sat ready in the firing chamber, completely unaware that it was about to become the most famous piece of metal in galactic history. Time seemed to slow down as Alex pressed the firing control. The electromagnetic pulse that erupted from the railgun was visible to ships that were several light minutes away. The tungsten rod accelerated through the weapon's barrel so quickly that it created a shock wave in the space around the station. The projectile emerged from the railgun as what could only be described as a spear of pure physics, traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The rod covered the distance to its target in just 14 seconds. When it struck the asteroid, the result was beyond anything that even the human scientists had predicted. The asteroid did not explode or shatter into pieces. Instead, it simply ceased to exist as matter and was converted into an expanding sphere of superheated plasma that glowed brighter than most stars. The energy release was detected by sensor arrays across multiple star systems. Automated monitoring stations began broadcasting warnings about impossible energy readings and unknown weapon discharges. Within hours, every major military force in the galaxy would know that something unprecedented had happened. But for now, in this moment, humans allowed themselves to feel pride in what they had accomplished. They had taken the most basic principle of physics and perfected it beyond what anyone thought possible. The galaxy was about to learn that the quiet, primitive humans had been working on something that would change everything. Commander Zakth of the Klaxon patrol ship was the first alien to detect the energy burst from the railgun test. Zakth had been a military officer for 30 years and had seen every type of weapon that the galaxy's civilizations used in combat. The readings on his sensors showed an energy release that was completely impossible according to everything he knew about physics and warfare. The energy signature was unlike anything in the Klaxon military database. It was not the focused beam pattern of a typical energy weapon, and it was not the expanding wave pattern of an antimatter explosion. Instead, the readings showed what appeared to be a single-point source that had released more kinetic energy than a dying star. Zakth ran the sensor data through his ship's computers 3 times to make sure the readings were accurate. Within 2 hours of the railgun test, every major fleet in the local galactic sector had received automated alerts from their monitoring stations. The alerts reported an unknown weapon discharge of unprecedented magnitude in a previously empty solar system. Military commanders across dozens of different alien civilizations began diverting ships to investigate what had happened. Admiral Vexis Tar of the Hegemony Navy was attending a routine briefing about fleet logistics when his aide burst into the meeting with urgent news. The sensor networks had detected what appeared to be a weapon test of a type that no known civilization possessed. Vextar had commanded fleets for 40 years and had fought against every major military power in the galaxy, but he had never seen anything like the energy readings from this mysterious event. The first investigation ships to arrive at the test site found something that defied all their understanding of how space combat worked. Where the target asteroid had been, there was now an expanding cloud of plasma and debris moving outward at velocities that made no sense according to conventional weapons technology. The asteroid had not been destroyed by an energy beam or blown apart by explosives. Instead, it appeared to have been completely vaporized by pure kinetic force. Dr. Mortak, the chief scientist of the Vorthak Collective, studied the sensor data and came to a conclusion that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. The asteroid had been struck by something traveling at approximately 12% of light speed, and that something had been completely physical rather than an energy projection. No known civilization had the technology to accelerate solid matter to such extreme velocities. The Zephyrian crystal ships that arrived at the test site used their advanced sensors to analyze the debris field, and what they found made their commanders very nervous. The expanding cloud of vaporized rock and metal showed impact patterns that were consistent with a single kinetic projectile rather than multiple weapon strikes. Whatever had hit the asteroid had been moving so fast that it had converted both itself and its target into plasma through sheer force of impact. Captain Helen Torres sat in a Federation emergency meeting and listened as alien military leaders tried to explain what had happened. The Saurian general claimed it must have been a natural phenomenon like a rogue asteroid moving at impossible speed. The ethereal commander suggested it might be the result of a dimensional rift that had allowed energy from another universe to leak into normal space. None of the alien theories made any sense, and all of them were trying to avoid the obvious conclusion that someone had built a weapon more powerful than anything the galaxy had seen before. The Federation Council declared a state of high alert and ordered all member fleets to begin searching for signs of this unknown hostile force that possessed such devastating military technology. Admiral Vextar convened an emergency session of the Hegemony War Council to discuss the implications of the mysterious weapon test. If there was a new military power in the galaxy, with technology superior to Federation standards, then every existing alliance and balance of power would need to be reconsidered. The Hegemony had built their empire on the assumption that their energy weapons and shields were among the most advanced in known space. The Klaxon military leadership was particularly concerned because their entire battle doctrine was based on using biological armor and regenerative hull plating to survive enemy attacks long enough to close to short-range combat. If an enemy could destroy their ships with kinetic weapons fired from extreme distances, then Klaxon tactics would become completely useless. Dr. Mortok presented his analysis to the Vorthak leadership and recommended that they begin developing countermeasures against kinetic weapons immediately. The collective had always relied on their ability to appear and disappear using spatial manipulation technology, but even that might not be enough protection against projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The Zephyrians were perhaps the most worried of all the alien civilizations because their crystal cities and elegant ships were designed for beauty rather than durability. A kinetic weapon that could vaporize solid rock would turn their floating crystal palaces into clouds of glittering dust. The Zephyrian High Council ordered an immediate review of their defensive capabilities and began discussions about building more heavily armored vessels. Captain Torres watched the alien panic with carefully hidden satisfaction. She had been present at briefings where alien commanders had dismissed human kinetic weapons as primitive and useless. Those same commanders were now scrambling to figure out how to defend against kinetic attacks that they had never considered a serious threat. The Federation Science Division launched a massive research project to analyze the debris from the destroyed asteroid and determine what type of technology could have caused such destruction. Alien scientists worked around the clock trying to reverse engineer the attack based on the physical evidence left behind. What the aliens found made them even more nervous. The impact had been caused by a single solid projectile made of tungsten, which was a metal that could be found in the asteroid belts of most solar systems. There had been no exotic materials or advanced alloys involved in the attack. Someone had simply taken ordinary metal and thrown it fast enough to turn it into a weapon of mass destruction. The revelation that the mysterious superweapon was built from common materials rather than rare elements made the threat seem even more dangerous. If any civilization could build kinetic weapons using ordinary metals, then the technology might spread rapidly throughout the galaxy and upset the careful balance of military power that had kept the peace for centuries. Military leaders across the galaxy began ordering their science divisions to investigate whether their own civilizations could develop similar kinetic weapons. The research projects were given the highest priority and unlimited funding because no one wanted to fall behind in what was clearly going to be a new arms race. Dr. Patricia Moore monitored the alien communications from her secret facility on Europa and smiled as she listened to the panic in their voices. The alien scientists were trying to figure out how to build railguns, but they were approaching the problem from the wrong direction. They were still thinking in terms of energy weapons and exotic physics when the solution was actually much simpler. Alex Chen began work on the second railgun platform while the aliens were still trying to understand how the first one worked. Human engineers had already solved all the technical problems that the alien scientists were just beginning to discover. By the time the aliens figured out how to build their own kinetic weapons, humans would have a fleet of railgun platforms ready for action. The galaxy had spent 3 years treating humans as primitive and harmless. But now, they were about to learn that they had made a terrible mistake. The quiet species in the corner had been working on something that would change the rules of warfare forever, and the aliens were about to find out just how dangerous humans could be when they set their minds to it. The moment that would change everything began with what should have been a routine first contact ceremony in the Grand Hall of Federation headquarters. Ambassador Elizabeth Carter sat in the human delegation section, watching as the newest threat to galactic peace strutted into the chamber with absolute confidence. The Devastators were massive beings that stood nearly 3 meters tall with natural armor plating covering their bodies and built in weapon systems that could punch through standard Federation shields like paper. War Prime Thokmar led the Devastator delegation, and his presence filled the chamber with an aura of barely controlled violence. The Devastators had conquered 17 star systems in the past 6 months, and their military technology seemed to be immune to conventional energy weapons. Their bioarmor could absorb energy blasts and convert the power to strengthen their own weapon systems. The Federation Council had called this emergency session because the Devastator advance threatened to upset the balance of power that had kept the galaxy relatively peaceful for centuries. Traditional diplomatic solutions were not working because the Devastators viewed negotiation as a sign of weakness, and they only respected civilizations that could match their military strength. Elizabeth had been instructed by Earth to observe the proceedings and report back on how the Federation planned to deal with this new threat. Human intelligence had been monitoring the Devastator expansion, and the reports were not encouraging. Every Federation fleet that had engaged the Devastators had been defeated or forced to retreat. The aliens were starting to panic. Admiral Vex Tar of the Hegemony Navy stood up to address the Devastator delegation, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in dozens of major battles. He informed War Prime Thokmar that the Federation would not tolerate further Devastator expansion into established territories, and that continued aggression would result in a coordinated military response from all member civilizations. War Prime. Thokmar laughed at the Admiral's threats, and the sound was like grinding metal echoing through the chamber. He announced that the Devastators claimed the entire galaxy by right of conquest, and that the pathetic energy weapons of the Federation were completely ineffective against Devastator bioarmor. He gave the assembled civilizations one standard: galactic cycle to surrender or face complete annihilation. The chamber erupted in protests and counter-threats as alien leaders tried to assert their authority over the Devastator ultimatum. The Klaxon representatives clicked their mandibles in anger, while the Zephyrian delegates sang their crystalline battle hymns. The Vorthak Collective spoke in unison about the futility of resisting their collective will. But Elizabeth noticed that none of the threats carried much weight, because everyone knew that the Devastators had already proved their military superiority. That was when Elizabeth stood up from her seat in the primitive species section. Her voice was quiet, but somehow it carried through the entire chamber and brought the alien arguments to a sudden halt. She requested permission to demonstrate humanity's response to the Devastator threat, and the unexpected interruption from the supposedly harmless humans caught everyone by surprise. War Prime. Thokmar looked at the small human woman and laughed, even louder than before. Elizabeth activated her personal communicator and spoke the words that she had been hoping she would never need to use. She authorized Europa Station for live fire demonstration and transmitted targeting coordinates to Dr. Alex Chen, who was waiting light years away with his finger on the firing control of the second human railgun that had been completed just weeks. After the first successful test, she informed the chamber that impact would occur in 47 seconds, and then she sat down to wait. The aliens looked confused by her calm confidence, while War Prime Thokmar continued to mock the idea that the primitive humans could pose any threat to the mighty Devastator war machine. Light years away, Alex received the authorization code and confirmed that his targeting solution was locked onto the coordinates of the main Devastator battle fleet. The second railgun was even more powerful than the first, and it was loaded with a tungsten penetrator that had been specifically designed to punch through the heaviest armor that any known civilization could produce. Alex began the firing sequence and watched as power flowed through the magnetic coils of his weapon. The targeting computer calculated the exact trajectory needed to hit a moving target across interstellar distances and made microscopic adjustments to ensure perfect accuracy. In the Federation Council chamber, Elizabeth checked her chronometer and announced that impact would occur in 10 seconds. War Prime Thokmar was still laughing when his flagship simply ceased to exist. The tungsten rod fired from the human railgun struck the massive Devastator dreadnought amidships at 12% of light speed, and the impact converted both the projectile and a significant portion of the ship into superheated plasma. 3 escort vessels that had been positioned too close to the flagship were destroyed by the expanding cloud of debris and energy. The laughter stopped immediately and was replaced by stunned silence as alien sensor operators confirmed what their instruments were telling them. The most powerful ship in the Devastator fleet had been destroyed by a weapon fired from a location that was several light years away from the battle site. The attack had been launched before Elizabeth had even stood up to speak, and the targeting had been precise enough to hit a specific ship in a formation of dozens. Elizabeth looked directly at War Prime Thokmar and explained that the attack had been carried out by a human weapons system located several light years from the Federation Council chamber. She informed the shocked Devastator delegation that humans currently had 17 more such installations coming online within the next 6 months, and each one could place a kinetic projectile anywhere in the galaxy with pinpoint accuracy. She turned to address the stunned alien delegates and acknowledged that Devastator assessments of human technology were partially correct. Human ships were indeed slower than most alien vessels, and human energy weapons were less advanced than Federation standards. However, the Devastators had made one critical error by assuming that technological advancement meant abandoning fundamental principles of physics. War Prime Thokmar asked the question that was on everyone's mind, including the alien delegates who had spent 3 years treating humans as harmless primitives. He wanted to know what humans intended to do with their obviously superior military technology and whether they planned to conquer the galaxy like the Devastators. Elizabeth smiled and gave an answer that would be remembered in galactic history, books for thousands of years. She explained that humans wanted the same thing they had always wanted, which was to be treated as equals, rather than as primitive children who needed guidance from their alien betters. As of that moment, humanity was withdrawing from the Tier 7 classification and declaring themselves a sovereign military power with the capability to defend their interests anywhere in known space. She offered to negotiate mutual defense treaties with any Federation members who were interested in human protection against threats like the Devastators. The terms would be simple and fair, with humans providing military security in exchange for full membership in galactic civilization, including access to trade routes, advanced technology, and representation in Federation decision-making processes. The Devastator delegation left the chamber without another word, because they understood that their invasion plans had suddenly become impossible to execute. You cannot conquer a galaxy when your enemies can destroy your fleets from across interstellar distances using weapons that travel too fast to be avoided or intercepted. The alien delegates spent the rest of the day in emergency sessions trying to figure out how to deal with the fact that the species they had been ignoring for 3 years had just become the most powerful military force in known space. The humans had not only solved the technical problems of building relativistic kinetic weapons, but they had also demonstrated the strategic thinking to keep their capabilities secret until the perfect moment to reveal them. Dr. Patricia Moore watched the proceedings from Europa Station and felt vindicated for all the years that alien scientists had laughed at her research. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the oldest and simplest solutions were also the most effective. Human civilization had built its expansion on the principle that kinetic energy was the most reliable form of power in the universe. The age of human expansion was about to begin, and it would be built on the foundation of superior engineering and strategic patience. The first human railgun had fired, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson it taught. Never underestimate the species that perfects the art of throwing rocks while everyone else is playing with fancy lights. Humanity was no longer the quiet species sitting in the corner. They were the ones that everyone else had learned to respect and fear.